All right, welcome to tonight's call. Now, I want to give you a quick disclaimer, all right? This is a little bit of a darker lesson here, and it's conspiratorial, it's shocking, it's scary, it's all these intense things, and but it's something I think you need to see because something's happening in this country and around the world. And I think when you really understand the magnitude of it, you're going to think about processed foods and processed beverages in a different way. Okay, so let's hop in with a quote here from Tucker Maxwell. I'm not really sure who that is, but the quote is perfect for what we're talking about. The devil doesn't come to you with red face and horns. He comes to you disguised as everything you ever wanted. And this sums up the processed food and beverage industry perfectly, right? With their exciting, enjoyable products that are simultaneously killing us. I don't mean to be sounding extreme here. I'm being very literal. Okay, because, you know, we hear all the time about the obesity epidemic, but for me anyways, you know, again, who lives this stuff, I don't really think I got what that meant, you know, until I saw this map here that I want to share with you, because something very dark is happening, and it's just happening within the last 20 years or so. Okay, so you see this map here, and it's obesity and diabetes, and this is a little over 20 years ago, and, you know, on the obesity side of it, you're seeing the two states with the highest rates of obesity are somewhere between 18 and 22%. Okay, but let's watch what happens over time. And we start to see that things change very quickly. Okay, so now we're 10 years, right? And now the highest states, and again, there's 6 of them, are over 26% with rates of obesity. And now there's only one state that's under 18%. Okay, and so let's go another 10 years into the future from where we started. And so we end up to where the last one I could get was 2015. And look what has happened. Okay, this is really serious. This isn't because people's metabolisms have changed. It's not because people have somehow lost their willpower. There's something going on that can go in just 20 years from this map here. And take a look at this, right? Again, the two highest states are 18 to 22%. And just in a little over 20 years, we get to this. Okay, something's going on. And I'm going to show you what I believe is the main cause of it. And again, you keep your mind open, you can make your own decision, but I'm going to share you with what I believe. And I believe a lot of it comes down to these companies and all the products that they are intentionally making as addictive as possible, and they're marketing to us in the most intense and manipulative ways that have ever existed in history. And again, this is just the truth of it. Now, I want to make something very clear before I even get into this, is that I know the thing that prevents people from wanting to know about this is they feel they won't be able to eat these things afterwards. I got to tell you right away that you have to get comfortable in this day and age living in the gray space. What that means is you can recognize these foods are not good for you. You can recognize they're addictive, and yet you can still eat them sometimes. It's what I do, right? Not all of them. Some of the sodas I've cut out completely. A lot of these foods I've cut out completely, but some of them I still eat sometimes. Okay, so I want to say right off the bat, this is not an all or nothing sort of approach. And so I want to say that right off the bat, because if you feel like it's got to be all or nothing, it feels overwhelming and you just check out. Okay, so please relax. You don't have to give all these things up at once, but you've got to start to see the truth. Okay, what I believe the truth is anyways. All right, so let's kind of hop in. A few quick notes. A lot of this information comes from a book by Michael Moss called Salt, Sugar, Fat. Highly recommend it. You know, it's so good. In my opinion, it's kind of the companion to The End of Overeating by David Kessler, which is more about kind of the individual responses to the fast food culture we live in the processed food culture we live in. And the Salt, Sugar, Fat is more about the company, the business of selling these foods to us. Now, one thing I think that we're going to start with here is that we went through something that again, it's unpleasant in one sense, but we can learn from it. And that's what happened with cigarettes in our culture. Originally, they were marketed as being healthy. If you look at old cigarette ads, you would see doctors selling these cigarettes and talking about the healthiest ones. Okay, and then, after a period of time, people started to catch on that maybe they weren't so healthy. There started to be studies that they were linked to cancer. Well, the cigarette companies sat on this for a few decades, and in those times, countless people died, from these cigarettes. So the cigarette companies, I think we clearly look at them now and are, at the very least, skeptical of them. And at the extreme, we hate them, right, for what they do, because it is, so. Again, to sell something so manipulatively that can literally kill us, is horrible. So it's important to understand that a big change here, right? When we talk about, a little over 20, 30 years ago, Philip Morris, the cigarette company, acquired Kraft and General Foods. Okay. And so what happened is around that time, you started to marry the processed food industry with the marketing of cigarette companies. And so when we say that the processed food companies are just like the cigarette companies, no, they are the cigarette companies. It's the same people. They have now since divested their interest because of the lawsuits aimed at the cigarette companies. So they don't want to be able to take the food money as well. So they've divested it, but it's all the same people and it's the same philosophy. And, again, that's just what it is. So whatever your feelings are for cigarette companies, and usually they're kind of a negative now, it's the same people making the foods that we like so much. Now, these companies are only concerned with profit. Now, I think we know this, right? Again, this is kind of stating the obvious, but I think it needs to be stated one more time. I don't think these companies want to kill us. I don't think they want to make us overweight. If they could come up with a way for their product to be healthy and sell as much of it, I'm sure they would do it. But the point is that profit is their main goal. And us getting sick from their product is a side effect that they are willing to accept. And again, when we think of drug dealers, for example, we have very negative connotations to them. We don't look at them as just people trying to make some money. We take the effects of what they do and what they sell. That's the primary way we view them. And so, again, these companies are only concerned with profit, but because of that, they don't care what their products do to us. And clearly, as we remember the maps, they are doing a lot of damage, right, to all of us as a whole. Whether they affect us personally or whether they affect people we love, we're all being influenced by this at this point. Salt, sugar, and fat. Okay, so I'm going to be talking more about this next week in specifics. But basically, what you need to know is the way that they create addictive products is that they are manipulating the salt, sugar, and fat within these products, and it causes us to get addicted to them. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about this tonight, and then, like I said, next week we'll really get into detail with this. Again, the map we were looking at was obesity, but at this point in time in America, 3/4 of the adult population is overweight or obese. Okay, so again, something is going on beyond just our willpower or our genetics or metabolism's changing. Right. Something is definitely happening here. Now, as we get into this, remember, your perceptions are your greatest tool, and that is the purpose of this lesson here, is I want to help shift your perceptions of the foods you're eating and the companies that are putting them in front of you. If you look at what's gone on with cigarettes over the last 25 years or so, you see a decline in cigarette sales. Why? Because we think of them differently. We primarily think of them as dangerous. Okay, and I think that's a very helpful thing. We think of the companies that put them out there, as being, they're not in our best interest. They're not trying to help us, and they don't care if they hurt us. And I think that perception shift that happened with the cigarettes is what has led to them not being as popular. And so I believe when it comes to the food, when you start to see these foods with clean lenses of perception and see what they really are and what they're really doing, that can be one of your greatest tools for changing the way that you eat naturally. And truth is the strongest weapon you have against false conditioning. Okay, so again, I urge you to relax. Some of this stuff is inflammatory. It's offensive. It's angering. All of these things. But relax and remember that when you can hold on to the truth of what these foods are actually made of and how they're actually getting you to get addicted to them, it's through that truth, I believe, that you're going to find a way through it to help you create the body and the health that you deserve. So I want to show you, this is 2012, right? So we're talking, a few years ago, but I wanted to show you the size of what we're talking about here, right? Because I think we lose sight of this sometimes. But the processed food industry is a $1 trillion, industry. It's huge. And in 2015 anyways, the top 5 processed food companies were Tyson Foods, PepsiCo, Nestle, Coca-Cola, and Kraft, right? Look at these numbers. So these are they get the lion's share, of these, of this industry. And so most of the products that you're consuming, from a convenience store, from the supermarket, majority of them are tied to these big companies here. So let's talk about how they get you to crave and consume so much, because that's what their business model is built on. Now, in 2011, the average soda consumption is 32 gallons a year, and sweet drinks, energy drinks, teas, 14 gallons a year per person. Okay, just to give you an idea, what they're doing. So what they look for when they're creating products is they use something called the bliss point, and this is the precise amount of salt, sugar, and fat combinations that make the foods or the drinks the most palatable and delivers the most pleasure. In other words, this is what makes it so addictive. And this is a really important point to understand. It's not 100 years ago where willpower was enough. We're at the point now where they're able to manipulate the ingredients of these foods so precisely that they're extremely addictive. And so it goes beyond our capacity to just say no. It's in the realm of nicotine or cocaine, doing those and thinking that you just use willpower to stop yourselves, okay? Because these foods are getting hyper palatable, is the word that they use. There's a thing called vanishing caloric density, right? I'm just giving you just a point so you can get a little bit of an idea of what the industry, lingo is, so you can realize the level that they're on. And I got a few more examples coming up here as well. Vanishing caloric density is if something melts down quickly, your brain thinks there's no calories in it, and you can just keep eating it. So I write Cheetos because Cheetos in the processed food industry hold a special place, because the two things that factor into palatability and addictive quality of the food is the sensory attributes of it, right? The taste of it, how it tastes in our mouth. But the other thing is the mouthfeel. It's a big part of that. And so Cheetos hold a special place because when you put them in your mouth, they start to dissolve. And in nature, this does not exist. So our brain doesn't understand how to track this. And it becomes a real problem because it's not a natural food. And so our brain doesn't know what to make of it. And it makes it very, very easy to over-consume it because we don't understand what the calories we're getting, are. And the same thing happens with liquid calories, sodas, or whatever liquid calories you drink. The brain doesn't understand that because they don't exist in nature. So it's a key thing to understand. And again, as I said, the two key things responsible for creating cravings are the bliss point and the mouthfeel. And, again, these are so engineered at this point that to just expect that you can just use willpower to say no to them, it's got to be more than that. You need to perceive these things as addictive and use them accordingly. That's the first step, I believe. So marketing tricks, let's talk about this. The most common marketing tactic, over the last 100 years is to promote one good ingredient, hoping that consumers will overlook the rest. Okay, so this, you've seen it, you may not have had it at the front of your mind, but you walk through the grocery store, this is what they do. And so different periods of time, different things are the evil ingredient. So sometimes it's fat, right? So everything had to be low fat. Sometimes it's carbs, so everything's got to be low carbs. Sometimes it's sugar, sometimes it's salt. And so they round robin it. And so whatever is kind of in the headlines at that time, they say, oh, it's low that, hoping that you won't read the rest of the ingredients. And if it's low sugar on the front, maybe you won't realize how much salt it has to make up for other things, So recognize that that's a tactic they use. Cereal manufacturers on average spend twice as much on ads as they do on ingredients. Again, I share this with you to reinforce the idea that they're not a company out to help you be healthy. They're a company that are trying to get you to consume as much of their product as possible. That's their one and only goal, literally. That's all they care about. Product news, okay? So this is something they do. And again, you know what this is. It's basically there's always something new about the product, right? And you have to do that because with so many products in this day and age, excitement is a part of what motivates us to buy it, right? So the more crunch, new recipe, less sugar, it's always something exciting, makes it feel different, and it's just one more thing that can encourage us to buy it. Ubiquity strategy, excuse me. And so this is a big one, like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, the real big guys, to be in as many settings as possible, right? And so all they need to do is get their product or just their advertising at movie theaters, at concerts, baseball games, any place you go to have a good time that's fun, entertaining, a special occasion. They just need to get themselves there, and your brain does the rest because your brain associates that product with the good time you're having. So you take your kids out or your grandkids out to a baseball game, and it's a special occasion, and you're in a heightened state, and you associate that heightened state to the marketing you see. Now, again, it's very subtle, right? It's just one more thing. Again, that's the thing to understand. It's not just the TV ads that are conditioning you. It's the ubiquity of all of it. It's constantly around us, which serves to normalize it. Okay, remember this. Let me just share this real quick. Sugar and salt, to a certain degree, have really been around for about 150 years. Okay, sugar, by the way, a lot of times people think, you take a sugar cane and you tap the side of it and the sugar falls out. Not true. There have been wars fought over sugar, okay, and salt. It's not that easy to come upon. And so the reason I mention that to you is really it's been about 150 years that it's been around in any consistent way. And so all of human history before that 150 years basically existed with no added sugar, right? There was sugar in fruit. And, so again, when we're surrounded by it, it normalizes it, and it starts to feel normal to consume this much sugar. When in reality, evolutionarily, physically, our bodies have not adapted to eat this amount of sugar. It's completely unnatural to consume the levels of sugar and salt and fat that we consume, okay, at the very least. So I wanted to share this with you, right? This was from an industry insider. The packaging is tailored to excite us. The advertising uses every psychological trick to overcome any logical arguments we might have for passing the product by. Their taste is so powerful to remember from the last time we had it, and formulas are calculated and perfected by scientists. This is what you're up against, right? This is the tip of the iceberg, right? Now, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to give you a few solutions at the end here. But this is what's going on. And when they talk about an obesity epidemic, don't be tricked into pretending that we're not sure where this is coming from. We're very sure where this is coming from, just like scientists were sure where lung cancer was coming from in the 70s. And what the cigarette companies did is every time those studies come up, they minimize them. They come up with their own paid studies to dispute them. And they're always working to cloud up the truth. And that's what's happening right now, I believe. And so, again, this is all coming at us. Now, again, like I said, next week we're going to talk about the specific ingredients and why we get addicted to them. Okay, we'll go into that more. Here, again, I just want to show you the people behind these products, these people behind the warm and fuzzy feelings you have for the products you love and for the advertising that we all feel good about are the same people that sell you cigarettes. Okay, that's what you have to keep in your mind. The business of selling processed foods. Let me share this with you. In his book, Salt, Sugar, and Fat, he talks about how Coke refers to their most loyal customers as heavy users. And so you find within the industry, there's a lot of drug-type references. And people that are heavy Coke users are referred to the same way you would refer to a drug user. Okay, this is how they look at it. And their whole goal, as we'll see here, their whole goal is based around this question of how can we drive more ounces into more bodies more often? And, when I read this, it literally makes me feel sick to know that one of the largest companies on the planet is using all of their resources to answer this question of how they can get more ounces into more bodies more often. And I could tell you, one of the examples that they do is they worked with McDonald's at one point to get people to stop drinking water and start drinking more Coke, because if someone goes from a small Coke to a medium Coke for an extra 50 cents, they make 45 cents off of that because the soda's so cheap. If someone gets a water, they don't make any money. And this is the mindset they're in. This is what they're looking to do. So again, this is what we're up against. So who's looking out for us, right? Department of Agriculture division that helps people eat healthier in America here. This is the group that's supposed to train us and teach us and give us the best science of how to be healthy. And it's called the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion. They get 0.0045% of the overall $146 billion budget. Right? So where does the rest of the money go? You know, well, it goes to different places, but a lot more of it goes to subsidizing corn, dairy, and meat. Okay, so just, again, I'm not going to get into conspiracies here, but just think to yourself where their loyalties lie. Okay, and again, this is a fact. You know, the amount of money that this part of the Department of Agriculture gets. And again, they subsidize a lot of things that are literally at the cause and the core of what are making us overweight. So here's a few eye-opening numbers, and these really kind of got me, you know, and so I hope they have some effect on you. Unilever, right, a huge food conglomerate, they own Ben & Jerry's. They spent $30 million on brain imaging and other advanced neurological tools to study the sensory powers of food. Specifically, they had people in a fMRI machine, which is a machine that when you're in there, it can basically scan your brain in real time. And what they would do is they would drip different ice creams into their mouths and watch what happened to their brain. And again, if you want to get into the cynicalness, what they found is that these ice creams with their high fat contents and their high sugar contents lit up the same parts of the brain that light up. There are pleasure centers, you know, literally within our brain. They light up the same parts of our brains that light up when we do cocaine or have nicotine. Okay. And so what they did with that, some of that, again, it helps them refine their formulas, but they came up with a marketing slogan out of that one that said, ice cream, scientifically proven to make you happy. Right. So again, these people are working on a level that I don't think we really think about very often. Frito-Lay's, right? Their research complex outside of Dallas has nearly 500 chemists, psychologists, and technicians conducting research every year, year in, year out, right? Think about that. That's one company, right, with these people working on this. Just to break it down a little more, they have a $40,000 device that simulates a chewing mouth to test and perfect chips. Discover things like the perfect break point of chips, right? Which, by the way, is the 4 pounds of pressure per square inch. Okay, remember we talked about the thing that makes food most addictive is that bliss point and the mouthfeel. And so that chewing part, that perfect chewing, makes it more addictive, right? We remember that and we crave it. Okay, so again, I just share a couple of these things with you just so you can get... so you can see what you're up against. You know, this isn't grandma's recipe, you know, in the background, you know, doing things. So I'll give you one more example of this. I didn't write it down here. It's because we think, okay, well, so there's salt and sugar in these, whatever. It's not just salt and sugar. Salt, for example, they have over 100 different shapes that they can use for different applications, right? The chips don't go down a conveyor belt and they just sprinkle salt on them. That's how they used to do it. Now what they do is they have specific shapes of salt for different applications. One of them that sticks in my mind is they have a quadrilateral pyramid shape that's hollowed out in the middle. And what that means is that salt, when it's in that shape, has 8 sides now, and it's hollowed out. So when it hits your tongue, the flavor explodes, making it more addictive. Again, it brings me back to the cigarettes. If you ever got to see, I think it was called The Insider with Russell Crowe, and it was about the cigarette industry. And one thing that always stuck with me from that movie, he was a scientist that worked at the cigarette companies, and he was a whistleblower, and he did an interview on 60 Minutes talking about what they did. And I remember one thing is he said, we don't call them cigarettes, we call them nicotine delivery devices, because the nicotine is what is addictive. And, you know, what makes cigarettes so unhealthy is not just the tobacco, it's that a lot of the cigarettes have over 100 different chemicals in them. And one chemical I remember specifically is ammonia. Well, why do they put ammonia in a cigarette? It's because it thins your blood and it allows the nicotine to enter your bloodstream quicker. Well, why do you want to do that? Because it makes it more addictive. The quicker you get between the cue and the response, the more addictive it becomes. The quicker you get a response, as soon as you get the nicotine hit, the quicker that is to the lighting it up and puffing it, the more addictive it is to your brain. And it's the exact same thing with the food. You know, the quicker you get that hit of salt, that hit of sugar, that feeling of fat in your mouth, that mouthfeel, your brain goes crazy. And it literally makes it addictive. So my main point is that it's not just enough for willpower, because you're not just up against regular food. You're up against hyper palatable foods that are engineered to be as addictive as possible. So let's talk about some solutions. Again, I know this is kind of a dark and it feels overwhelming. And so let's just take a stop. Let's just take a break for a second. Take a deep breath and relax. Right? I need to take a deep breath. I get all worked up with this stuff. Okay. And rightfully so, but getting worked up leads us to eat more. So we got to calm down, center ourselves, relax. We see what we're up against here. So let's talk about a couple of the solutions. And again, I'm going to talk more about these next week in specific to the salt, sugar, and fat. I think when you understand how those affect us, that'll be even more helpful in getting the solution. And this isn't just because you learn this doesn't mean you'll never eat these things again. Again, you got to be comfortable with that gray area. Okay? So the first thing I think is research. You know, I think that the more you truly understand and can kind of cleanse the lenses of your perception and see the truth, I think that's one of the most powerful ways there is to change, how you eat and what you want to eat. So, again, documentaries nowadays, there are so many great documentaries, and, an hour and a half of watching this or these movies can really, really transform the way you view foods, the way you view health, weight loss, all of it. And it sticks with you. Again, it's in psychology, we call this counter conditioning. In watching documentaries, researching online, reading books, seeing the truth, understanding what is going on here. Because the more you understand why these foods are addictive and why people have trouble stopping eating them, the more you understand it, the less you blame yourself. I think people in their minds, they just think, oh, food, I'm addicted to it. And they're thinking just regular old food. That's not what's happening. It would be like again, I think of it more like the people in the 40s and 50s who were smoking without any clue that the cigarettes were addictive. It just wasn't in the public consciousness at that time. And they had no hope practically. You know what I mean? Because again, it's something addictive, but they didn't even think it was addictive. And so that is a big problem. So as soon as you realize it is addictive and why it's addictive and how our brains respond to it, as I said, we'll talk about the brain science of it a bit next week. But the more you understand what it is, I like it because you stop blaming yourself and thinking you're the problem. And you start to realize the real problem is these substances. And again, I don't believe, most people don't have to stop these things 100%. I believe that you can have some moderation with them. Okay, but at the very least, you have to understand that they're very addictive in nature. And how you choose to move forward with that is going to be up to you. Again, there's no right or wrong way. There's only what works for you. But I believe you have to start with a sense of truth, what's really happening here. I always like to say, put your truth glasses on, right? So a little bit of what we talked about here, and the more truth you access, you get into your brain, the more you can utilize. When you go shopping, read the nutrition labels. Look through the marketing. You have to look through it because the marketing is so advanced at this point. It is unbelievable. It's beyond anything we can even comprehend. Okay, so you need to use your truth glasses. When you go shopping, understand what you're getting, right? When you see commercials, I'll tell you what I do. Again, luckily I don't have regular TV except for when football season, so I don't see a lot of commercials. But when I do, right, I see a lot of soda commercials. I see a lot of fast food commercials. When I see like a soda commercial, as soon as I see it, I start in my head. The internal dialogue goes, 20-ounce bottle of soda, you got 20 tablespoons of sugar in it, 20 tablespoons of sugar, and I visualize that in my mind. I visualize liquid calories, right? I visualize my teeth, getting rotten. I visualize no health benefit to it. So this is what I tell myself. Again, that might sound a little extreme, but again, it's counter conditioning. And same thing with the fast food or convenience stores. You walk in there, And instead of just thinking that those foods are so great, again, we want to use counter conditioning where we're seeing the truth. Because the truth is, technically, a lot of these processed foods technically are not food. They don't have any of the natural fibers in them. Usually when you eat regular, normal food, you have to chew it a lot, which lets your brain know how many calories you're consuming. And when you're eating these hyperpalatable foods that are melting in your mouth, 3 chews and you could swallow them, your brain can't measure anything. And you're putting yourself at a real disadvantage. Again, it's fine sometimes, but to regularly do it and think you're nourishing yourself in any way is a big mistake. I'll give you an example. I drink beer, but I was thinking to myself, when I drink a beer, there is absolutely no part of me that thinks I'm eating food. You know what I mean? I'm just drinking a beer and I like to get a little buzz. That's what I like, okay? But that's why I'm doing it. I'm doing it just to get a little buzz. And I think if you start looking at processed foods more like that, like we all know it's entertaining to eat these foods. It tastes good. We got that. But if you can separate when I eat these processed foods, it's entertainment. I do it to enjoy myself. It's a treat. It's a reward. Great. But distinguish it from nourishment. It's not nourishment. It's really not. You know what I mean? Because it's all manipulated and, it just doesn't interact in your body the way natural foods do. Okay, so I think that's the first step, is being able to see it for what it truly is. And then finally, in a practical sense, it really comes down to removing, reducing, and replacing as much processed food as possible. Okay, and this is a forever thing. Okay, so there's no perfection, there's no figuring it out and that's it, because we don't live in a vacuum, and they're constantly coming up with new products. We're trying them. We'll go to a party sometimes and we'll try something again to be social. We're always going to have to deal with it. It's kind of like, again, it's not as extreme. These foods are not as addictive as heroin and cocaine. Okay, they're not as addictive, but they are addictive. They are on that spectrum. Okay, nicotine's on the spectrum. You know what I mean? They are on the spectrum of it, but they're not as addictive. But we need to recognize that it would be like if all of a sudden they legalized cocaine and they were able to market it incessantly at us. You know what I mean? Like it starts to get normalized, and then it's like maybe you do it a little bit here and there. Well, every time you do it, that's what creates the cravings. So ultimately, the ultimate solution here is to remove, reduce, and replace. And again, I make some parallels to cocaine. It is not cocaine. I just want to be clear on that. But it is addictive. And so, again, it's a process. We don't just cut it all out. That's overwhelming. We remove some of it that we can. Right? The things we don't really care about, we're kind of indifferent to, remove those, right? The things that we really like, let's just reduce them. We have to stop them completely. Let's just, let's cut the servings down on them, okay? And then ultimately we can replace some of them. I mean, that's another strategy you can use. Replace them with water, with natural food when you can. Again, now it depends. You make a list. The things you like the most is you reduce them, right? The things you kind of like, in the middle, you work on replacing them. And then the things you don't really care that much about, you're somewhat indifferent to, those are the ones you just remove. And it's an ongoing thing, okay? But as you take this approach and you consistently keep doing this, and again, this is why I say it's not all or nothing. When it comes to weight loss, we're so conditioned to be all or nothing, which is a strategy doomed for failure. Because, again, we've been talking a lot about drugs here, but this isn't drugs. Drugs you can give up and never have to eat again. Or you never have to use again. Food you have to eat. Okay, so it's a different thing. And so you have to give yourself, you have to look at it differently. There is no perfection here. I've been doing this for over 15 years. I've talked to thousands of people. I've never met someone who has never eaten junk food again or never eaten sugar again. Right? Everyone slips up somewhere along the way. And I don't believe, again, it's different for each person, but I don't believe you have to give these things up. But I do believe you have to monitor them. That's where I think we're at. And so again, you got to come up with your own strategies here. But this isn't about, I'm going to stop eating sugar for the next month and then I'll never eat it again. It just doesn't work that way. Give it up for a month, great. But if you eat it again, it's not the end of the world. Don't be all or nothing. It's the nothing that gets people in trouble. Because typically what happens is, the all lasts for a week and the nothing lasts for 3 months. You know what I mean? And so we never get any headway. You're much better off. Remember, mastering your weight has less to do with being perfect and has much more to do with being able to get back on track quickly when you screw up. because you're going to screw up. That's going to happen, guaranteed. So you need to have a strategy to get back on track quickly with it. And so that goes in line with what we're talking about here, that be patient with this process, right? You don't have to cut everything out immediately. That's that, again, live in that gray space of, and it's weird because there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance when you're doing something that you know isn't good for you, but it's okay. Work on feeling okay with that because that's going to serve you better. Really what we're looking to do is reduce the amount of processed food you're eating ultimately. And that reduction is going to turn into weight loss for you. All right. And it's going to make the whole process easier because it's going to reduce the cravings as well, making it easier to eat better. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope this was, put some lights on in your mind. Because, again, it's not a conspiracy. It's all there right in front of us. But again, it's hard to actually see this information for what it is because there's a lot of money involved. Okay. So, it's up to you. Again, I think that's the final note I want to put it on here. You're not getting any help here. There's so much money to be made from you over consuming these foods that you're kind of on your own. You have to take this upon yourself, and you have to consistently reinforce what the truth is and see these foods for what they are. Okay, so keep that in mind, and keep it up. And again, next week we'll talk about some more about this. We'll talk about the salt, sugar, fat specifically, and how it affects you. Okay, so have a great week, and I'll talk to y'all next Tuesday. Good night, everyone.